Barron Trump demolishes the TV host in a live debate, and his response leaves America stunned. The studio was glowing with a golden hue, with cameras strategically placed to catch every subtle expression, every twitch of doubt, every moment of hesitation. The air crackled with anticipation, an invisible tension weaving its way through the crowd. Millions of people were watching from their homes, eager to witness what promised to be a high-voltage clash. At the center of it all, seated with an aura of quiet authority, was Victoria Steele. Her name carried significant weight, known for her razor-sharp intellect and interviews that relentlessly exposed the vulnerabilities of even the most seasoned figures. Her presence alone made politicians tread carefully, but tonight, her opponent was someone unexpected. Across from her sat Barron Trump, a young man whose name had been murmured in political circles for years, but had never truly stepped into the spotlight until now. Dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit, Barron exuded an almost unnerving calm. His posture was impeccable, and his gaze was unwavering, unshaken by the magnitude of the moment. Victoria let out a slow breath, her mind running through the meticulously prepared questions she had crafted. This wasn't about small talk. She wasn't here for a polite conversation. She was here to dismantle, to expose, and to push this young man into a corner from which there would be no escape. The audience leaned forward as the opening music faded into silence. The pleasantries were over. Victoria raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "Barron," she began, her voice smooth and controlled, laced with just the right hint of challenge. "This is an interview many people have been eagerly awaiting." Barron nodded slightly, unfazed. "Is that so?" Victoria leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with sharp anticipation. "You're a name people recognize, yet few truly know you. Well, that changes tonight." The atmosphere in the studio thickened, and the game was on. Victoria Steele was no stranger to high-stakes interviews. She had built her career on unearthing hidden truths, cornering the most impenetrable minds, and breaking down even the most unshakable guests. But tonight, she had set her sights on Barron Trump, a young man who had lived in the relentless glare of political scrutiny but had never ventured onto its battlefield until now. The air around them seemed to grow heavier as Victoria crossed one leg over the other, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. Confidence radiated from her, the kind that comes from years of shaping public narratives. Every question she had in her arsenal was designed to unsettle, to strip away any carefully crafted facade. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, anticipating every possible response, every potential defense. With a knowing smile, she began again. "You know, Barron," her voice carried the weight of both curiosity and subtle provocation. "For someone born into such a powerful legacy, you've managed to remain quite the enigma. People have seen you, but they haven't truly heard you. Why is that?" The question was calculated, inviting a response that could either make Barron seem evasive or force him into a premature declaration of intent. Barron leaned back slightly, his hands resting together, every movement deliberate. There was no sign of unease, no flicker of hesitation. His voice, when he spoke, was measured and smooth. "Silence isn't always absence, Victoria," he replied. "Sometimes it's preparation." A murmur rippled through the audience. The answer wasn't defensive, it was composed, strategic. Barron had sidestepped her trap, without even breaking a sweat. Victoria tilted her head, adjusting her strategy. If subtlety wouldn't shake him, she'd turn up the pressure. "You've been in the public eye your entire life, whether you wanted it or not," she continued, her gaze narrowing ever so slightly. "Do you ever feel like you're just a product of perception? That people have already decided who you are, regardless of what you say?" It was a loaded question. If Barron admitted that he was shaped by public perception, he'd be seen as lacking individuality. If he denied it, he risked appearing out of touch. Barron exhaled slowly, his expression unchanged. He didn't rush to answer. Instead, he allowed a few seconds of silence to stretch between them, commanding the space rather than filling it with nervous chatter. "Perception is an interesting thing," he finally said, his voice smooth. It tells you more about the people observing than the person being observed. Victoria's eyes flickered. He wasn't just responding, he was redirecting the conversation. This wasn't the reaction of someone caught off guard. It was the move of someone who had anticipated the attack. Victoria adjusted her posture, her smirk widening just slightly. This was shaping up to be more interesting than she had expected. "All right," she said, picking up her notes with deliberate slowness. "Let's talk about the weight of your name." The audience was on the edge of their seats. The real battle was about to begin. A hush fell over the studio, the kind of silence that only preceded the sharpest blows. The viewers were completely absorbed in the intellectual duel unfolding before them. This wasn't just another interview. It was a battle of intellect, a clash of perception. And Victoria Steele had just pulled out her sharpest weapon. She placed her notes down, folding her hands neatly on top of them. The act was deliberate, a silent declaration that she needed no script to dismantle her guest. Her eyes locked onto Barron's, sharp and unyielding. "Let's be honest," she began, her voice smooth but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Your last name is one of the most polarizing in modern history. It carries power, controversy, expectation. Whether you like it or not, it has shaped how people see you. My question is simple. Has it also shaped how you see yourself?" Barron met her gaze with an unreadable expression. He didn't shift in his chair, didn't fidget under the weight of her question. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his tone steady and controlled. "Everyone is shaped by where they come from," he said. "But the difference between being shaped and being defined is a matter of choice." Victoria let the answer linger, polished and near perfect. He had sidestepped the question with ease, but she wasn't about to let him slip away that easily. "You speak of choice," she pressed, leaning forward just slightly. "But how much choice have you really had? You were born into wealth, power, influence. You didn't have to fight for a place at the table. You inherited it. Would you call that privilege, or do you reject that label?" The tension in the room thickened. It was a carefully crafted trap. If Barron admitted to privilege, he'd alienate those who resented power. If he denied it, he'd come across as detached from reality. But Barron didn't react. He didn't tense up. Instead, he gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Privilege is an interesting word," he mused. "If a doctor's child grows up with access to the best education, are they privileged? If a musician's son grows up surrounded by music, is that privilege? Or is privilege simply another way of saying that some people start their journey differently?" Victoria's fingers twitched against the desk. He wasn't answering the question. He was reframing it, reshaping the very structure of the conversation. "So you acknowledge it then?" she pushed. "I acknowledge that no one chooses where they start," Barron said smoothly. "Only where they go from there." A ripple passed through the audience. Some nodded in quiet approval. Others exchanged glances. Victoria recognized the shift immediately. He wasn't just evading. He was leading. If she allowed him to keep control, she would be the one on the defensive. "Fair enough," she said, shifting gears. "Let's talk about something that isn't defined by privilege, public scrutiny. Unlike the rest of your family, you've managed to stay out of the media's direct line of fire for most of your life, until now." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Tell me, Barron, why step into it now?" Barron took his time before answering, his demeanor as controlled as ever. "Because silence isn't always the best response," he said finally. "Sometimes, people don't just need to hear stories, they need to hear them from the right voices." Victoria's gaze narrowed. It was a subtle but pointed remark, one that implied he wasn't just here to be questioned. He was here to challenge the very nature of the media itself. "So you believe you're the right voice?" she asked, tilting her head. "I believe that people deserve to decide that for themselves," Barron countered. The tension in the room felt like a live wire. This exchange wasn't just about politics or privilege anymore, it was about control. Victoria shifted tactics once again, leaning back in her chair and adopting a more casual pose. "All right," she said, her tone deceptively light. "Let's take your name out of the equation. Imagine you weren't a Trump, no legacy, no recognition. Do you think people would still be listening to you right now?"